Okay, everyone, we are on the home stretch. I'm going to ask everybody to take your seats while I very briefly kick off our next panel, one that I'm particularly excited about. And we've heard about what's happening with nonprofits in Colorado, and I think it's only right. We started the day with Colorado policymakers, and now we are going to have our final panel dedicated to Colorado policymakers. Our moderator is Janice Blanchard, Governor of Polis, a senior advisor on aging, and many other things, including helping us with this conference and arranging for the co-sponsorship. We thank you so much. We also have Kelly Folks, who is the director of Arapahoe Douglas Works, Dr. Christian Itin of Colorado's Strategic Action Planning Group on Aging, and Katherine Keegan, who holds a new office as director of Colorado's Office of the Future of Work. So I'm now going to turn this over to you, Janice.
Thank you, Katherine. I got to start with an anecdotal story for the panelists that went before me. I have a little dog. She's like 14 years old, and she's gotten to the stage where she yaps and whines at night, and it was like driving me nuts at 4 o'clock in the morning. So I finally got up and I took Tylenol, drank some water, and went back to bed, and still didn't sleep. And got in here this morning, and I have drifted off continuously at my table, and I got to thinking about it. It was the Tylenol was in a travel bag that we take when we go traveling, and I texted my husband. I was like, "It is the Tylenol in the red little color-coded pill box," and he's like, "No, that's the Ambien." So I was not bored. I was under the influence of Ambien at a conference, which I've never done before, but I'm wide awake now. So that's the good news. So thank you all that are still here. It's a long day, but I think it's been a really interesting and exciting day. I'm really excited to have the panelists here today to join me to explore what Colorado's doing from the inside out. So I'm just going to start it off with Katherine. I'll put you on the hot seat. Can you describe some of your current efforts within the Office of the Future of Work that are most relevant to experienced employees?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me and being here. I always have to, whenever I see Transamerica, I get happy because that's actually where my parents met in Denver 40 years ago, working the day shift and the night shift, and my mom had to correct my dad's work. And so at the Christmas party at Transamerica, she was like, "Show me where this Michael Keegan is, and I'm going to give him a piece of my mind," and then the rest is history. So Transamerica is near and dear to my heart, but that's besides the point. So yeah, I'm the director for the Office of the Future of Work, which was established in September of last year through executive order from Governor Polis. And I report directly to Joe Borello, who you heard from this morning as well. And when we think about the future of work, we're taking a very holistic lens. I think all of you in business and in workforce, sometimes the future of work just gets drilled down to, AI and robots, and sometimes it's all about gig workers. And we're trying to look at the entire picture, and we see the future of work in Colorado being the impact of all of these forces that are at play, from demographic shifts to globalization and market shifts, as well as the technological advances that are changing the work we do and how we do it. And so the aging population is directly part of all of that. And we really wanted to take a population focus when we started this office to understand what are we doing at the state that is designed to serve older workers, experienced workers, and how can we do that better. So I've spent the last 6 months in this role understanding all of the amazing work that you've heard about today and connecting with all of the partners and figuring out how we can elevate that work and change those structures and systems and catch up from that lag so that we can better serve and better support these workers and connect them to opportunity.
Thank you, Katherine. Kelly, I'm going to ask you now. You've been in workforce development for some time. How are you seeing the training and the information change? What are the demographic change you're seeing in the office? And then what is your office doing to accommodate that shift?
Again, I'm Kelly with Arapahoe Douglas Works Workforce Center, and so there, I do want to put a shout out to all the workforce centers. We have 10. I've got people doing this. We have 10 ultimately local regions in which all of them have services similarly, but because we are very locally driven and locally controlled, we can determine what that looks like to a point within the federal and state guidelines. And so that being said, Arapahoe Douglas Works and our board for 15 plus years has really focused on that, what we call that seasoned employee, that older worker. And so we have a resource center within our resource center for that population. And we have specialized and customized events, because what we are seeing, to Janice's point, is what we are seeing is that probably over 60% of the workers coming into our center are that generational, we call it generations at work, the older generation, the age friendly, it's those seasoned employees. And so we're seeing that 50 plus customer base is really 60 to 70% of our customers coming in. And so we've really looked at how can we refocus, reshift, and make sure we're meeting not just the demands of them, but the demands of our employers, business and industry out when trying to fill their positions. So I do have quite a few things in the back that will show some of the different things, but I think we have other questions, so hopefully I'll answer along the way.
So Christian, good catalytic innovation happens often from both sides, from the ground up and from the top down. And in the role of the Strategic Action Planning Group on Aging, I'm sure you've kind of taken that broad view of what needs to change in the workplace, what is the education, training, and support that older adults need re-entering the workforce. And I would like for you to share some of the recommendations that have come out of the work that y'all are doing, looking at aging from the 21st century with regard to workplace issues.
Sure. Thanks, Janice. So I would say that for SAPGA, as we came into existence in 2015, and I would say that our legislature and our current lieutenant governor, who was in the legislature at the time, saw this need for a entity to look holistically and integratively at the issues of aging. And workforce was a part of that. And we've looked at workforce from both the workforce to serve older adults, but also, and most importantly, older workers who want to or need to stay in the workforce. So we understand that it's both those pieces. So one of our earliest recommendations was to, as we looked at our state, we have a wonderful workforce development process. These workforce development centers, workforce development council, we have a nice infrastructure. However, for the most part, it tends to focus on K through 12 or K through 21. It does not focus as inclusively as we think it needed to. So one of our first recommendations was that the Workforce Development Council that oversees the state needed to have an aging voice. And Phil Nash, who's back there, wave your hand, Phil, is our first appointee to the Workforce Development Council to bring that voice to the body. With Phil's leadership in that position and Janice's predecessor, Wade Cannon, we've also in that body now created a subgroup, a working group around the issues of aging. So we saw a need to put into the very structure of the state systems that are inclusive from the get-go. And so we've continued to build on that. Other recommendations, I was just reviewing sort of some of them. From the very beginning, we looked at best practices. So family caregiving and sort of flexible workplace and work time to support that. We're in our first sets of recommendations. In our second set, we continue to build on that and to encourage the state of Colorado. When we talk about the state of Colorado, we are referring to it holistically. So it includes the governor's office, it includes the legislature, and it includes public-private investment and partnership. Those entities need to look at best practices and building those into the workplace. So it's really exciting to see that we are beginning to bring into the state some certification processes or ways of helping employers understand what best practices look like and bring it in. This research, I think, is going to further punctuate this idea of best practices. And that when we talk about these best practices, we've consistently been referring to them as these are best practices for all workers, not just for folks who are older. So a flexible workplace, a flexible work schedule, those things benefit everybody. And I think that this inclusivity and this universal design principle that we talk about with housing is equally important and has been a sort of a mainstay of our work. Our workforce subgroup, which has been one of the most active parts of SAPGA from the very beginning, Teresa Falagrady, who's also in the room here, is one of our current co-chairs of that group. And we continue then to look at specifically what do we need to advocate for older workers as a part of it. One of the things I'm taking away from this meeting is that perhaps we need to do a better job of articulating what needs to happen for the workplace. And maybe we've made recommendations in that arena, but perhaps there's something there that is more inclusive that invites that opportunity. So that's some of where we're sort of beginning to look at and play around.
Thank you, Christian. So that leads to a good question. Often when things come up in society, things are happening everywhere at the same time. And sometimes that leads to duplicative work. Sometimes that leads to really interesting partnerships. But how do you think we can better track and integrate all the good work we're doing across the state? What might that look like?
That's me. Okay. So yeah, I think that's a big part of my role in the Office of the Future of Work. I'm an office of one right now, so I'm working in partnership with all of the people that are here today and with all of the other state agencies to think about what are those promising practices that we are seeing and how do we make sure that the mechanisms are in place for more communities to adopt them, especially in a locally controlled state with budget challenges in every capacity. So that has been part of the first 6 months as well, and will continue to be part of the first year. We are doing regional convenings and actually just held the first one in Pueblo on Tuesday, where I was presenting research about the future state in Colorado, both in terms of these demographic shifts that we've talked a lot about today, our aging population, as well as our diversifying younger population, and how we don't necessarily have those systems in place that best serve those individuals. Yet we have all of these different systems and programs that are operating in silos and are doing good work, but in a disconnected way. And so what we want to do is understand what are these communities that are not sitting back and waiting for the future to happen to them, but are planning on their own and identifying these gaps and barriers that we can use to have a more robust system and a policy agenda that removes those barriers and gets rid of those gaps. So I see a lot of promising practices for the experienced workforce across Colorado, and I see opportunities to really make a difference for these older workers in terms of protections and benefits as well. Part of that, I think, is the on-demand economy. How many people had a Lyft or Uber driver that was over the age of 50? Sorry to make you profile, but that you thought was over the age of 50. Yeah, it's a huge part of that workforce, and we often are trying to connect. We often think of this future of work and the tech economy and these other opportunities as separate from these issues that we've talked about today, and it's a challenge facing all parts of the workforce ecosystem and all parts of our state in different ways.
And I would just add to that, I think one of the biggest challenges, just to kind of add on to both of their responses, is really educating not only all of the partners around the table of who's doing what and what best practices exist out there, and really pulling all that together so we aren't reinventing the wheel or we're really blending and braiding funding and creating a better wraparound service delivery approach. I think that's one piece of it. The other one is really educating business and industry on what are the benefits of hiring the older generation, what comes out of that, and really trying to debunk the myths and really say, here truly is what is out there. Years ago, we did a facts and myths side by side. Our board released that, and that was very telling and very educational to our business and industry partners, because myth, for example, that an older worker costs more money in healthcare. No, That's not true. The facts are that it isn't. Actually, your younger worker, because they're starting families, they're out on paternity and maternity leave, they have a family plan versus maybe one or two where an older worker has the children out of the home. So those are really educating business and industry around the advantages of hiring and that they typically stay longer, even if it is their encore career. And so that's really a big piece that I think is important to get out there. So sorry.
No, that's perfect. I like it when it flows like that. So, looking over the next 3 to 5 years, how do you think we can get not only more employers involved, but how do we capture the employees both that are looking for jobs, and what interests me is those that gave up after the economic crisis of 2007, 2008. There were some people in their 50s that looked hard for work and then eventually just gave up. It's that kind of invisible group that we know is out there that would come back to work, but for whatever reason, they've kind of given up. How might we invigorate that group as well as the group that's actively looking?
Yeah, one of the main things that is a focus for our office and in our approach, what we're trying to apply is really community-based catalysts and solutions. So as part of the regional convenings, we're going out and talking to diverse groups of stakeholders, both of whom are participating in the workforce system, our service providers, our employers, but also doing more of those public forums to engage people that may not be walking into your workforce center or even know that that's available to them. And so I think getting them engaged in the conversation and recognizing that they are part of the future of work and part of the solution in their communities is one way that we're going to try to energize those workers that haven't felt served by the system. We're also, that's part of our population focus too. We recognize that in our current economy, there are many segments of our populations that have been left behind by our current way of work and of working in the government and are at risk of being further left behind. So when we think about the aging populations, when we think about immigrants and refugees and other new Americans in our society, when we think of our unemployment rate for our Black and African American populations, there's clearly something not working if they are continuing to see these rates of unemployment and discrimination that have not been addressed. And as technology and market forces and communities change, we need to make sure that we understand how to redesign our programs to better serve them and remove those policies that are preventing them from accessing opportunities. So I think that the engaging at that community level, making sure their voices are heard, and then designing specifically with those populations in mind so that we have this universal design that creates access for those that weren't accessing the system before.
Okay, thank you. First, I want Christiane, I'll get back to you. Following up on that, I tried to talk Wade coming in today. Wade Buchanan just took over the office of Just Transitions.
Yeah.
But one of our big four from the governor's office is 100% renewables and environmental changes. And in many parts of our state where coal and oil are big business and people have good jobs, what are we doing to prepare those populations, even as we're trying to transition out of fossil fuel into green technology and green renewables?
Yeah, I think this is one case of disruption that we've seen happen in the past and we will continue to see happen. And it's part of those market forces that I referred to that are shifting the type of work we do and how we do it. So the Office of Just Transition, which Wade Buchanan is now leading, is really focused on identifying policies and programs that will support workers that are transitioning from coal-based industries to new opportunities. And I think in the past, sometimes the translation has been, oh, well, they can all just go work in renewables. And that's really not the right answer. And what we need to do is, I believe it was Rick from Mercer was talking about, is thinking about those specific skill sets and understanding what those are and the jobs they have and what other industries, renewable, other types of energy, agriculture, advanced manufacturing, what those can translate to, and what is that in between? What is that short-term credential or training that we can provide that connects them to new opportunities? And at the same time, we recognize that many of those people working in coal-based economies are working in six-figure jobs right now. And if we're talking about many of our rural communities, there are not those opportunities to replace that. So how do we transition their experience as a worker from a one-income household to two-income household? and take advantage of some of the childcare, pre-K, and universal kindergarten opportunities that could make it more feasible for both partners in the family to go to work. But that's a huge cultural shift, and that's why we have this office thinking about these opportunities.
Thank you, Catherine. Christian, you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, just following up on sort of the workforce centers, I think that one of the things that, Janice, you and I have talked about this a lot, that so much of aging has come from the perspective of fragility and poverty. And I think Joe mentioned this earlier about workforce centers also came out of that poverty perspective in terms of you're addressing folks who are in poverty. I think a big part of this is normalization. It's about building the fabric that workforce retooling is just a natural part of life. If a career is 60 years long, there's no way you can tool for that when you're 18 years old, 16 years old. Well, I don't know what I'm going to do when I'm 60. I don't even know I'm going to do it if I'm, do 25 or 30. I think it's changing a mindset. So, and we see this a lot in our rural communities, and we haven't really talked about that as much today in terms of the difference in experience between our rural communities, our frontier communities, our tourism mountain communities, and then our metro communities. That this idea of asking for help, though, in a rural context is not normative. We do for our neighbors because that's what we do, but I certainly wouldn't ask for it. And I think that going to a workforce center and asking for help is antithetical to the lived experience of many of our folks in rural communities. And so I think that this conversation that we're having here is at a bigger level about a cultural shift that we are a part of and that we have to push. And that is going to help make these services more available and more accessible.
Yeah, and I would just follow up with that to totally agree with it. It's educating, similar to educating business and industry, right? It's also educating the job seeker, educating that population to say it's okay to come in and ask for help. You haven't done a resume in 20 or 30 years. That's normal because you were in a career and you stayed at the same employer and you might have moved up within that employer. So also looking at that, so you may need to upskill your education, or you may have transferable skills. What does that look like? And somebody helping them to really look at what skills have they built over the years? What does that look like? How does it transfer into a new industry? Because it does. And so in many cases, it's really educating that job seeker as well and getting the word out on it's okay to come into Workforce Center. Workforce Centers, 80 Works. We're in the South region, Arapahoe and Douglas. We serve people from 14 to, we just placed an 88-year-old not too long ago. And so, bottom line, we serve every single, age group, all different, ethnicities, all different skill sets, six-figure, not. So it's really educating that the Workforce Center isn't just serving those in poverty, it's serving everybody. It's not, and so I think it's important to educate. And I think a challenge with workforce centers is we are a best kept secret, and a lot of the funding that we have we cannot utilize for marketing. And so it's looking at how do we get that word out, how do we make sure people know what services they can get and how they can get help.
I was going to add just a number of our recommendations in the last several cycles have focused on the education arena. In terms of workforce development, because a big part of higher education is about preparing a workforce, at K through 12 as well. And I think that I don't know that group is well represented even right here today. And so I think that when we talk about credentialing, we talk about certification, we talk about giving credit for prior skills and prior learning. All these pieces are really not at the forefront of current higher education, at least at my academic institution. Jody's out there. Is it at CU? I don't think so, right? It's not the way that our higher education, and that as a pipeline piece, they also don't necessarily think of themselves as part of the encore career piece and developing and training and marketing. And we know that there's a crisis looming for higher education. Because although that growth and decline is also going to mean that some of these higher education institutions, some of us employed, may not be employed much longer. Certainly not employed the way we are right now.
I will say, I think within, especially our community college system, we're seeing a lot of momentum around changing that narrative and that lifelong learning perspective. So there's actually a bill in our legislature right now that's talking about expanding access to prior learning assessments and using that as a way to reward work experience with credit for especially people who have some college and no degree to get to that, to finish their credential. And so we also, I think in some cases, especially in our rural communities, we have the community colleges that are sort of the centers of those communities and are really looking at ways to bring in different types of training and are participating in those sector-based strategies and are using technology to access new types of workers. And so it happens in pockets though, and I think that's one of the big challenges. And what again I see as sort of the goal of my office is making sure that everyone is aware of those efforts happening in those communities and that we're removing barriers from other communities that have not been able to enact those promising practices. Because the idea of work ethic, we also have to build this learning ethic as we have our lifelong careers and lifelong learning in order to remain competitive in transition industries as certain tasks are automated and certain industries disappear.
And listening to that makes me think about, probably one of the big first crucibles of public health was, health, and the big picture was public health and how that changed lives. And more recently, it's been this concept of social determinants of health, that it's all integrated. And we all kind of intuitively get that, right? If you don't have a ride to the doctor, it doesn't matter whether you finally found the one that takes Medicare. And I'm wondering how workforce is similar, and that there are multiple factors going on. You have to have a ride to get to the job interview, right? You got to have the clothes. You have to have the updated skills, and where do you get those? How do you enter into the office, get the job, and then they're telling you about, well, just do Google Hangouts. Took me a while to figure that one out. But things that are intuitive to a digital native of 30 or younger are harder for older workers to quickly catch speed up. And many are embarrassed because they don't want to fit that stereotype of saying, I don't know how to do Salesforce or whatever the new program is. And it takes a little bit longer for me to get it. So what do you see as those cofactors? And how might we do it so that people don't feel embarrassed to come to the workforce center, or don't feel once they've been hired embarrassed to ask for those things that they may need special support on, that has nothing to do with their ability. They're just learning a little bit differently. Because it's like and someone gave me the example, it's like, I grew up all my life speaking English, so I understand English. But if I had grown up all my life speaking Spanish and then tried to and learn English, there would still be some things that I'd be getting caught on. And the analogy was, and that's the way it is for kids that have grown up with the remote in their hand at 2. It's just a little bit different language, and it takes a little bit longer sometimes for older people to learn it.
Yeah, I think what Christiane said about the normalization of aging and these different types of workers that we have, and the promotion of an intergenerational workforce is key to that, because as many things that experienced workers need to learn, so do younger workers. There's a need for a mutual respect within the workplace and opportunities to engage in that, and compassion for those different factors that are impacting people's lives as they experience different life stages. But we see, the trends around the future of work and people wanting more flexible workplaces, people working in location-neutral employment. We see needs for all of these other infrastructure and enabling factors to be put in place in order for people to actually realize those opportunities. And so what I'm really focused on is connecting the dots for those foundational resources, promoting career coaching and navigation in every door, so that no matter if you're walking into a community college, into a workforce center, into a nonprofit, that you have access to someone that can help you manage your expectations, manage your career, and connect you to the right opportunity for upskilling and the right opportunity for the employer that matches your interests. So that's sort of the way I look at it. I welcome other people's thoughts.
Something that comes to my mind is, I think the idea of culture and climate within organizations is a huge part of this. There are a couple of examples rumbling through my mind here that that are state-based, where we have rules and regulations that allow for flex time and flex place, but then they are implemented in what I would call an old school framework of being basically a manufacturing context. So you punch in, you punch out. It's not really about flexible time and place. It's a name, but then it's done basically as a factory job. And so that old mindset that's existed, in this country for now over 100 years of sort of a factory mentality and training factory workers and treating workers from a factory perspective, I think that continues to hamper. And so it's about changing organizational culture and climate so that it's normalized, so that if I need to come in one day at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because I've got doctor's appointments for my parent or my child or my spouse, that becomes normalized, as opposed to I have to go seek approval from the HR department to take that leave. Well, I'm just not going to do it. I'm just going to call in sick, whatever that piece is. So.
And I would just add to both Catherine, it's really again, I keep saying educating, but it's really, I feel like I'm repeating myself over and over, but it's really educating on the generations in the workplace. And so our workforce board not too long ago actually did a report, and I brought some here, but it's also on our website, but it talks about the 4 generations at work. And what does that mean for each generation? So each generation has a reason they're the way they are, right? We're all different a little bit, but there's also commonalities. And so how do you train and educate the employers on the different generations, the managers that are managing the 4 different generations in the workplace right now? How do you train them to work with the different and understand where the strengths may lie and where the weaknesses may lie? One of the things we're actually, and this is just a really small scope, but one of the things that has been really important to me, just as a director over the Workforce Center, I have anywhere from 100 to 125 employees, which is nothing compared to big corporations. That being said, one of the things we're currently working on is a mentorship program within our organization that is tag teaming a younger millennial with a baby boomer, and really learning those skill sets. And we're looking at even piloting that with our Generations at Work Center and our Youth in the Works, or our Future You youth. So our Future You who are typically 16 to 25 in age range, they have a certain skill set that can be taught to a baby boomer. A baby boomer has great skill sets that can be taught to my younger generation. Life skills, how to get to soft skills, how to get to work on time, how to dress appropriately, how to follow through and stay at work, those types of things. So but it's getting back through educating and getting through the myths and the facts and what is truly the reality. And I think Catherine said it. I'm an Xer. I don't know I just got an iPhone 11 for work. I was like, I hate this. It has no button. Teach me how. And my younger staff were in there this morning in my office before the state was in there teaching me how to use the thing. I said, I can't do this. I can't do this. This is ridiculous. I can't. And so it's being okay with it. And I think you said that. It's teaching that it's normal. It's not out of the ordinary if you don't know. And so it's educating people that that's okay. That's how we learn, and that's how we build a stronger community and a stronger workforce.
Let go of the tech shaming.
Right.
So how are we on time, Catherine? We're done. We're done. Well, I want to thank everyone that has stayed to the very end for your time and your attention. I want to thank Catherine and Brian for putting this together, and to Next 50 for always supporting such great work, not just in Colorado, but in other places too. Have a nice afternoon and a great weekend, y'all.